The smoke came first, thin, sneaky, curling under the door like a warning no one was meant to ignore. Then came the crackling. Then came the scream. It was the kind of scream that didn't just echo through walls, it tore through the soul. Ronan Hale froze for half a second in the hallway, his heart slamming against his ribs as if it already knew what was coming next. The fire alarm hadn't even started yet, but the air had already shifted, thick and choking. Something was very, very wrong. Before the story unfolds, take a second. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in ordinary people doing extraordinary things, go ahead and like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel Echoes the Stories. Stories like this deserve to be felt, not just heard. Ronan didn't hesitate after that brief pause. Being a single father had trained him to act fast, to think faster. His daughter, Mira, was safe. He had just dropped her at school less than an hour ago. That knowledge steadied him, but only slightly. Because someone else wasn't safe. The scream had come from the apartment at the end of the hall. He moved toward it instinctively, his boots thudding against the cheap laminate flooring. The building was old, too old, and the wiring had always been questionable. He'd complained about it before, like everyone else, but nothing ever changed. Now, as the faint glow of orange flickered beneath the doorframe ahead, regret burned as sharply as the smoke filling his lungs. The door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open. Heat slapped him in the face like a living thing. The living room was already beginning to catch, flames licking hungrily at a tipped-over lamp and crawling along the curtains. The smell of burning fabric and plastic was suffocating. And then he saw her. She was on the floor near the doorway to the kitchen, her back pressed against the wall, her face pale and streaked with tears. One of her legs was twisted awkwardly beneath her, unmoving. Her eyes were wide, locked on the growing fire like she was watching the end of everything. "I can't move," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling. Ronan didn't think. He didn't calculate risks or wait for backup. There was no time for any of that. He crossed the room in 3 strides, crouching beside her. Up close, he could see the tremble in her hands, the way her chest heaved with shallow, panicked breaths. She couldn't have been more than 25. A stranger. Just someone who lived a few doors down. But in that moment, she was everything. "I've got you," he said, his voice firm, steady in a way he didn't entirely feel. Her eyes flickered toward him, filled with a fragile kind of hope that made his chest tighten. He reached for her carefully, one arm sliding behind her back, the other under her knees, hesitating only when she winced sharply. "My leg," she gasped, her fingers clutching at his jacket. "I can't feel it." "It's okay," he said quickly, though nothing about this was okay. "We're getting out. Just hold on to me." The fire surged behind them, louder now, angrier. The heat was intensifying, pressing in from all sides. Smoke curled around them, thickening by the second, clawing at Ronan's throat. He lifted her. She was lighter than he expected, but dead weight in a way that made it harder. Her body sagged against him, her head falling briefly against his shoulder before she forced herself to stay conscious. Step by step, he moved back toward the door. The hallway outside was already filling with smoke. Somewhere, alarms had finally begun to scream, their shrill wail cutting through the chaos. Doors were opening. Voices were shouting. Panic was spreading just as quickly as the fire. But Ronan focused on one thing. Getting her out. The floor beneath his feet creaked ominously as he moved, and the heat followed them like a predator. By the time he reached the hallway, his lungs were burning, each breath a struggle. "Stay with me," he muttered, more to himself than to her. She didn't respond. For a terrifying moment, he thought she'd passed out. Then her fingers tightened weakly against his sleeve. "I'm here," she murmured. Relief surged through him, sharp and immediate. He pushed forward. The stairs were just ahead, but already crowded, people stumbling down, coughing, helping each other. The building was coming alive with fear, but also with something else. Urgency. Determination. Ronan adjusted his grip on her and joined the flow. Each step down felt like a mile. The smoke was thicker here, darker. Someone stumbled ahead of him, nearly falling, and Ronan had to shift his balance to avoid crashing into them. The woman in his arms whimpered softly, her head lolling against his chest. "Almost there," he said, though he couldn't see the bottom yet. His arms were starting to ache, muscles screaming under the strain. Sweat mixed with soot on his skin, stinging his eyes. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. Not now. Finally, the ground floor came into view. Fresh air, real air, waited just beyond the exit. He pushed through the last stretch, bursting out into the daylight like someone breaking the surface after nearly drowning. The difference was immediate. Cool air hit his face, filling his lungs, clearing his head just enough for the adrenaline to spike even higher. Behind him, the building was coughing smoke into the sky, flames now visible through several windows. People were gathered outside, some crying, some shouting, some just staring in shock. Ronan moved away from the entrance, lowering the woman gently onto the grass. His hands trembled as he pulled back, suddenly aware of how hard his heart was pounding. "You're safe," he said, though his voice came out rough, uneven. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then slowly finding him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, tears welled up in her eyes, spilling over as she let out a shaky breath. I thought I was going to die in there," she whispered. Ronan swallowed hard, the weight of what had almost happened settling heavily in his chest. "But you didn't," he said quietly. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. Fire trucks. Ambulances. Help was coming. But for Ronan, the moment had already happened. The choice. The risk. The act. He sat back on his heels, running a hand through his soot-covered hair. His whole body felt like it was catching up to him now, the exhaustion, the fear he hadn't allowed himself to feel until it was over. The woman reached out, her fingers brushing against his hand. "Why did you come back?" she asked softly. It was a simple question, but it landed heavier than anything else that day. Ronan looked at her, really looked at her now, not just as someone he'd saved, but as a person. Someone with a life, a story, a future that had almost ended in a burning apartment. And he thought of Mira. Of her laugh. Of the way she ran into his arms after school, trusting completely that he would always be there. "I didn't come back," he said slowly. "I just didn't leave you behind." Her grip on his hand tightened slightly. Tears slipped down her temples, disappearing into her hair. The sirens arrived then, loud and commanding, filling the air with urgency. Paramedics rushed over, kneeling beside her, asking questions, checking her pulse, her breathing, her injured leg. Ronan stepped back, giving them space. For the first time since it started, he allowed himself to just stand there, to breathe, to feel. The fire roared behind him, but it no longer held the same power over him. Because someone had made it out. Because he had done something that mattered. As the paramedics lifted her onto a stretcher, she looked at him one last time. There was something in her expression now that hadn't been there before. Not fear. Not pain. Something stronger. Gratitude. Connection. A quiet understanding that in the middle of chaos, a stranger had chosen to care. And that had changed everything. If this story is touching your heart, take a moment to like, comment, and share it. Stories like this remind us that even in the darkest moments, humanity still shines through. Ronan watched as the ambulance doors closed, the vehicle pulling away with a wail of sirens. The crowd around him began to thin as people were accounted for, as firefighters continued battling the blaze. He stood there a little longer, staring at the building that had almost become a grave. Then he turned and walked away. Not like a hero. Just like a man who had something to get back to. A daughter waiting at school. A life that needed him. And somewhere out there, a woman who would never forget the moment someone refused to leave her behind. Before this story ends, take a second to comment the word hope if you believe that even one act of courage can change a life forever. Because sometimes, it's not about being fearless. It's about choosing to act, even when you're terrified. And that choice can mean everything.